Have you ever wondered why so many Muslims today hesitate to show their faith openly? Why some hearts that burn with love for Allah still hide behind fear, afraid of being judged, labeled, or misunderstood? It's not that faith is weak, it's that the world has made practicing Islam feel like rebellion. What if I told you that this fear itself is part of our spiritual test? One that reveals how deeply we trust Allah even when the world stands against us. Faith in modern times has become both a blessing and a trial. Many Muslims today live in societies where their beliefs are misunderstood, where the word Islam is often associated with stereotypes, and where the hijab, the beard, or even simple acts of prayer can invite unwanted attention. It's not always hatred that Muslims fear, it's the constant gaze, the feeling of being watched, judged, or made to explain one's existence. The heart of a believer knows the sweetness of faith, but the mind fears isolation. This internal battle between devotion and acceptance becomes heavy. Many Muslims start concealing their faith, not because they have lost it, but because they are trying to survive emotionally in spaces that make them feel different. The tragedy is that this quiet fear steals from them one of Islam's most beautiful gifts, the dignity of living truthfully. When one hides their faith, they also hide a part of their light, dimming the radiance that Allah has placed within them. Yet Islam was never meant to be hidden, it was meant to be lived. In a world that glorifies self-expression, it is ironic that faith expression is often seen as extremism. A woman wearing hijab is questioned about her freedom. A man praying at work becomes too religious. A person choosing modesty is told to lighten up. Modern culture claims to champion authenticity, yet it pressures believers to dilute their identities. This contradiction crushes the spiritual confidence of many Muslims. They begin to question whether they are being too visible, too serious, or too different. But the truth is, Islam never asks us to shrink for the comfort of others. The purpose of life is not to blend in, it is to stand out with grace. Practicing Islam openly doesn't mean preaching loudly or judging others. It means embodying sincerity through actions, kindness, and integrity. When Muslims learn to be unapologetically authentic in their devotion, they don't just preserve their faith, they protect their peace. It's important to understand that fear of practicing Islam is not new. Even during the Prophet's time, believers faced ridicule, loss, and danger for holding on to the truth. But their strength came from knowing that their worth was not tied to people's opinions. They were driven by a higher purpose, to please Allah, not the crowd. Today, the fear may not always be physical, it's emotional and social, yet the same cure applies. Trust in Allah. The Quran reminds us that whoever puts their trust in Him, He will suffice for them. This trust is not blind, it is built on knowing that no human judgment can ever override divine mercy. When a Muslim remembers that their value is not defined by social approval, but by sincerity to Allah, fear begins to dissolve. Practicing Islam then becomes not a burden, a liberation, a way of saying, I choose light even when the world prefers shadows. And as Muslims begin to reclaim this strength, they realize that their public faith is not just about them. It becomes a silent dawah, a form of calling others to truth through character and conduct. Woman wearing hijab with confidence teaches millions that modesty is power. A man praying in public reminds hearts that submission to Allah is nothing to be ashamed of. Every act of courage plants a seed in someone else's heart, inspiring them to believe again, to trust again, to return to Allah. The fear that once silenced Muslims becomes the fire that fuels their purpose. Because when one Muslim decides to practice openly and authentically, it gives permission for countless others to do the same. The world doesn't change when we hide, it changes when we rise. So if you ever feel afraid to live your Islam, remember this: your faith is not something to conceal, it is a light meant to shine. Every test, every stare, every unkind word is a reminder that Allah is watching your patience, not their judgment. Be kind, be humble, but never be apologetic about your devotion. Let the world see Islam through your gentleness, your discipline, your mercy, and your unshakable peace. Because when you walk with Allah, no fear can imprison your heart. The real freedom is not in being accepted by everyone, it's in being true to the one who created you. And that, indeed, is the courage that transforms fear into faith and silence into strength. There comes a moment in every believer's life when faith is tested not through tragedy, but through fear, the fear of being seen, the fear of being judged, and the fear of not being accepted. In today's world, this fear has found a home in the hearts of many Muslims who struggle between wanting to live their Islam proudly and the constant pressure of a society that demands they compromise it to belong. The pain of that inner conflict is heavy. It eats away at the soul quietly day by day. You see someone hesitate before saying Bismillah in public, quickly hide their prayer mat when a non-Muslim friend visits, or remove their hijab because it makes people uncomfortable. And yet, these small acts of concealment are not born out of arrogance or disbelief. They come from exhaustion, from the weight of always having to explain, defend, justify one's faith in a world that constantly misrepresents it. Many Muslims grow up learning that Islam is beautiful, peaceful, and complete. When they step into the public sphere, that same Islam becomes something they are told to water down, something that's too much, something that makes others oniyasi. That contradiction wounds the heart. It creates an emotional fatigue that makes the believer wonder, is it worth standing out if it means standing alone? And that is where the test begins, not in losing one's faith, but in quietly negotiating it for comfort. But here's the truth that many forget: Islam was never meant to fit into the mold of society. It was meant to transform it. The world was not supposed to define what is acceptable in faith. Allah did. Every act of faith, no matter how small or subtle, is a declaration that you choose Him over conformity. When a woman wears her hijab despite stares, she is not making a fashion statement, she's making a spiritual one. When a man stops his work to pray on time, he's not being rigid, he's being loyal to his Creator. Yet, modern life has confused loyalty with extremism and faith with identity politics. It's a strange irony. People celebrate being yourself until yourself is visibly Muslim. But it is in that very space of contradiction that true sincerity is revealed. The believer must ask, who am I trying to please? People who change with trends, or the one who never changes? Fear thrives in the absence of conviction. It grows when we forget who we serve and why we were created. And so the way to overcome it is not by seeking validation, but by seeking connection. Connection with Allah, the source of peace. The more you feed that connection, the less hungry you become for the approval of people. It's not an easy journey, and the world won't always understand, but that's the beauty of faith. It was never meant to be understood by everyone, only by those whose hearts are alive. If you ever feel unseen or misunderstood for your Islam, remember this: even the Prophet was ridiculed. Even the companions were isolated. Allah raised their ranks because of their steadfastness. Their struggle was the proof of their love, not the sign of their weakness. And so, when you walk through life feeling like your Islam makes you different, know that being different for Allah's sake is the highest form of honor. The peace you lose in trying to please the world is far greater than the discomfort you endure while standing firm for Him. The world's acceptance is temporary. Allah's acceptance is eternal. Your prayer, your modesty, your devotion, none of it goes unnoticed. Allah sees every silent battle, every withheld tear, every moment you choose faith over fear, and He promises in His book that whoever puts their trust in Him, He will be enough for them. That is the secret. Courage is not the absence of fear, it's the decision to still choose Allah despite it. And once you do that, you realize that no judgment, no label, and no opinion can ever overpower the peace that comes from being unapologetically His. There is something deeply human about the desire to belong, to be accepted, to be seen as normal in the eyes of others. Every soul, no matter how strong, carries within it that longing for connection. When that longing begins to compete with one's faith, when the need to be accepted by creation overshadows the need to be accepted by the Creator, something within begins to ache. Many Muslims today live in that tension between the heart that calls toward Allah and the world that calls toward acceptance. They want to pray in public but hesitate, fearing the curious stares. They want to wear hijab but worry about being labeled or misunderstood. They want to live Islam openly but fear the price of being different. This inner struggle is not new, nor is it shameful. It is the timeless battle between faith and fear, between the unseen and the seen. The Prophet himself and his companions faced ridicule, rejection, and isolation, yet their conviction never wavered because their compass was not the people's approval, it was Allah's. When faith becomes rooted in the approval of people, it withers the moment their acceptance fades. But when it is rooted in the love of Allah, it flourishes even in isolation. The irony of modern life is that it preaches freedom and individuality, yet punishes those who choose to live differently, especially when that difference is tied to faith. Society encourages you to be yourself, but only if that self fits within the acceptable norms of comfort and conformity. So, When a Muslim decides to visibly live their Islam, it unsettles people because it challenges the illusion that faith is a private matter with no place in the public sphere. And that's the hidden test: to live with sincerity when sincerity makes you stand out, to walk with humility when humility is mistaken for weakness, to hold on to your values when everyone else lets go for convenience. It's easy to say, I believe, when belief costs nothing. But real faith is proven when it demands sacrifice. And in that sacrifice, there is beauty, because every time you choose Allah over fear, over judgment, over mockery, you are carving your name among those who stood firm when it was hardest to do so. There's a reason the Quran constantly reminds us that this world is a test, because everything about it is designed to pull you away from what truly matters. The media, fashion, entertainment, even the smallest social interactions all subtly push the believer toward delusion. You are told that you can believe in God, but not too much, that you can pray, but not publicly, that you can be modest, but not visibly so. Slowly, the believer starts to internalize the lie that faith must be hidden to be accepted, that Islam must be adjusted to fit modernity. Islam was never meant to fit into fleeting cultural molds. It was meant to transcend them. The moment you start apologizing for your faith, you start shrinking the very light that was meant to guide others. When you walk into a room as a Muslim, your presence should not echo fear of judgment, but quiet strength. You don't need to argue. You don't need to prove. Your character, your calm, your mercy, and your manners are the loudest dawah you can offer. The Prophet changed hearts not through confrontation, but through consistent compassion and unwavering conviction. And that is the example for every Muslim who fears practicing openly. When you choose to live your Islam sincerely, Allah places a light in your heart that no one can extinguish. People may misunderstand you, but they cannot take away that peace that comes from knowing who you are and whom you serve. The key is to replace fear with purpose. Every hijab worn, every prayer made on time, every honest act in a dishonest world, these are not just habits, they are acts of defiance against the pressure to forget Allah. And perhaps the reason you feel isolated or judged is because Allah wants you to know what it feels like to rely solely on Him. He removes the crowd to teach your heart that He alone is enough. In that loneliness, there is purification. In that rejection, there is redirection. And in that steadfastness, there is reward beyond imagination. So when you fear being judged for your faith, remember this: the same world that mocks you today will one day admire your peace when theirs runs dry. Because peace is not found in blending in, it's found in belonging to Allah completely. Fear is a natural human emotion. When it begins to dictate our relationship with Allah, it becomes a chain that restricts the soul from rising. Many Muslims today find themselves trapped between wanting to please Allah and wanting to avoid the discomfort of judgment from people. They silence their adhan in fear of being stared at, hide their prayer in public spaces, or hesitate to mention their faith in workplaces or schools where religion seems out of place. This fear doesn't come from weakness of faith alone, from the pressure of living in a world that glorifies everything except submission to God. Society preaches tolerance, yet it tolerates everything but true devotion. It celebrates freedom of expression, yet condemns those who express their faith through modesty, morality, and worship. This double standard is not accidental. It is part of a larger system that pushes believers to privatize their faith until it becomes invisible, until Islam is reduced to a cultural identity rather than a living, breathing way of life. But a faith that is hidden out of fear slowly loses its vitality. When Muslims stop practicing Islam openly, not only do they lose confidence in their beliefs, but the world also loses the beauty and light of what Islam truly represents: compassion, justice, and inner peace. The real tragedy is not when others mock your Islam, it's when you begin to doubt the value of living it. Fear thrives in the absence of remembrance. The moment you start remembering who your Creator is, the size of your fears begins to shrink. Allah tells us repeatedly in the Quran that He is the protector, the guardian, the one who is near. When that truth takes root in your heart, the opinions of people lose their weight. You realize that no one's acceptance can add to your worth, and no one's rejection can take away what Allah has decreed for you. The greatest freedom a believer can experience is the freedom from people's opinions. That kind of strength doesn't come from arrogance, but from humility before Allah. When you bow your head to Him, you rise above the world. The irony is that those who fear practicing Islam openly often end up imprisoned by the very people they try to please. They tailor their faith to be less visible, less controversial, less noticeable, yet no matter how much they adjust, the world's approval remains temporary. Today they may accept you for compromising, but tomorrow they will still expect more. The cycle never ends because the world's standards are constantly shifting. What was once praised becomes mocked. What was once honorable becomes outdated. But Allah's truth never changes. His words are timeless, His commands are consistent, and His love is constant. Living Islam openly is not about arrogance or superiority. It's about honesty. It's about refusing to hide what gives your life meaning. Every time you wear your hijab with dignity, pray in public with humility, or speak the truth with grace, you are declaring that your faith is not confined to the corners of your life. You are saying that Islam is not just something you practice on Fridays, something that defines your entire being. And that is where true power lies, not in loudness or rebellion, but in silent steadfastness. People may look at you differently, but they will also look at you deeply. Your courage becomes a reflection of the peace they secretly crave. It's not about proving Islam right through words, it's about proving it through presence. When your actions echo sincerity, even the hardest hearts begin to soften. That is how transformation begins, one act of visible faith at a time. So when you find yourself afraid of being judged, remind yourself that the prophets were judged far more severely, yet their hearts never wavered. They faced humiliation, rejection, and persecution, but their trust in Allah gave them resilience beyond measure. The Prophet Muhammad was mocked, insulted, and ostracized, yet his response was never bitterness. It was compassion, patience, and unshakable belief that Allah was with him. That is the blueprint for every Muslim living in a world that misunderstands faith. You are not alone in your struggle. Every time you suppress the fear of people and prioritize the pleasure of Allah, you are walking the same path as the righteous before you. Remember, fear doesn't disappear by denying it. It disappears when you face it with faith. When you say Bismillah before stepping out, when you pray despite the stares, when you stand firm in your morals despite mockery, you are building spiritual muscle. Allah never leaves a believer alone in their struggle. He multiplies their reward in proportion to the difficulty they endure. What may seem like isolation is actually protection. What feels like rejection is often redirection. And what looks like weakness is sometimes the beginning of unshakable strength. The fear of practicing Islam openly can only be conquered by replacing it with a greater fear, the fear of losing the connection with Allah. Because once you truly understand that He is with you wherever you are, you realize that there is nothing in this world to fear and everything in this world to live for when you live for Him. In a world where faith is often misunderstood and Islam is frequently misrepresented, many Muslims find themselves caught between the desire to practice their religion openly and the fear of being judged, rejected, or even discriminated against. The modern environment encourages self-expression in every form, yet when that expression takes the shape of sincere devotion to Allah, it suddenly becomes controversial. A woman wearing her hijab may be stared at as if her modesty is a form of rebellion. A man praying in a public park may feel eyes on him, as if his act of worship is a threat. This contradiction is painful because it teaches believers that their connection with their Creator should be hidden to be accepted. But the heart knows that suppressing faith never leads to peace. It only deepens the void within. The reason many Muslims fear practicing Islam openly is not simply social pressure. It's the spiritual fatigue that comes from constantly battling between truth and comfort. Every soul was created to seek meaning, but when meaning is found in submission to Allah and the world rejects that submission, conflict arises. This conflict drains the soul and weakens the heart, yet within that struggle lies the opportunity for immense growth. Allah tests those whom He loves, and every moment of hesitation, every breath of anxiety about being visible as a Muslim can be transformed into an act of worship if the believer chooses courage over conformity. The truth is, living as a Muslim in a world that pushes materialism, self-worship, and moral relativism is like trying to hold a candle against a storm. The storm mocks the light. The candle doesn't stop burning because its flame comes from something pure. That is what true faith looks like. A steady glow in the middle of chaos. When you choose to live by your Islamic values, even when it's unpopular, you are silently declaring that your source of strength isn't the world's approval, Allah's love. Practicing Islam openly does not mean perfection, it means striving. It means reminding yourself that the purpose of life isn't to blend in, to stand firm on truth with humility and compassion. The world may call your values outdated, but Allah calls them timeless. The world may see your modesty as limitation. Allah sees it as protection. The world may mistake your obedience for weakness, but Allah records it as strength. To live your faith publicly is to remind yourself and others that Islam is not a cultural identity or a weekend ritual. It is a way of life that dignifies the soul and elevates the heart above the fleeting pleasures of this world. The Prophet and his companions faced greater ridicule, harsher rejection, and heavier burdens, yet they never hid their belief. Their resilience was not born from societal support, but from spiritual conviction. They knew that when Allah is by your side, even the entire world against you cannot shake your peace. It is crucial to understand that fear is not the enemy, surrendering to it is. Fear can serve as a mirror that shows us where our attachment lies. If the fear of people outweighs the fear of losing Allah's approval, it reveals that our hearts need purification. That's why the Quran constantly calls believers to remember Allah often, because remembrance is the medicine for fear. The more we fill our hearts with dhikr, the less space there is for anxiety and self-doubt. Every time you say Allahu Akbar, you are reminding your heart that Allah is greater than your boss's opinion, greater than society's expectations, greater than your insecurities. This realization reshapes the way you carry your Islam in public. You no longer see your hijab or your prayer as a target for criticism, but as a badge of honor, a symbol of connection to the Most High, and that strength radiates from within. People may not understand your choices, but they will feel your serenity. When you stand firm in your belief without arrogance, you become a silent dawah, a walking reminder of faith. And sometimes, your quiet confidence will plant seeds of curiosity in hearts that have long been empty.